All right, so welcome everybody to this live hosted by Vault Florence. My name is Francesca Romana d'Antuono. I'm the city lead of Vault Firenze, which is a local chapter to Vault Italia, which is the national chapter of Vault Europa. So we're having this live today because there is a pandemic, if you haven't noticed, going around. And in Italy, there is a national lockdown. So we're obliged to stay home, but still we don't want to miss the opportunity to really have thought of what is going on. We have today some guests. What we would like to do is really to investigate a little what is going on, but also have different perspectives. So both on a regional level, on a national level, and on an international level. In order to do so, we have a lot of very interesting guests. Let me introduce them. So we have with us today Teresa Kraft, which is the city lead of Vault Frankfurt. Vault Florence has a partnership, a very strict partnership with Vault Frankfurt. We visit each other and try to exchange best practices. So hello, Teresa. We have Simona Bonafè. Simona Bonafè is a member of the European Parliament. She is also vice president of the S&D group and the regional secretary of the Democratic Party here in Italy. Hello, Simona. Thank you for being here. We have with us Costanza Hermanin. Costanza is the vice secretary of the Europa party, and she is a professor at the John Cabot University and also at the Collège d'Europe. Last but not least, we for sure have our president, the president of Vault Italia, Andi Shehu, who is also a PhD researcher in history of economic. And we should have with us Eugenio Gianni. Eugenio Gianni is the president of the regional council and head candidate for the upcoming regional elections here in Tuscany for the center-left coalition, which Vault also supports. Unfortunately, I understand that he's experiencing some issues with the Wi-Fi connection, so he might join us later. So about this pandemic, just a few words from my side. The COVID-19 hit today more than around 170 cases worldwide. We understand that there are countries not reporting perhaps the correct number of cases, so this could be worse than it looks, especially countries such as Iran, and a lot of cases that have not yet been diagnosed. There is a national lockdown in Italy with more than 24,000 cases. Germany has hit 5,500 today. So really, it's quite messy from a medical perspective, but also from a political perspective. We have heard the words of Christine Lagarde, which is the head of the European Central Bank, saying that it's not their job to lower the differential between the bonds, the Italian and German bonds, which has caused a massive drop in the market. The USA with Donald Trump, they have locked down exports by Europe, which has also caused a lot of trouble from an economic point of view. Andi, I've stole this from your last post that I saw you posting online a few minutes ago. So the situation is messy, and what we want to understand is where do we stand now, and what we would like to do as Vault is to have this conversation as a first step in which political progressive forces try to answer the big question, which is what is the world that we want to see after this pandemic is over. So that would be the aim of today's debate. We're going to be here until 8. In order to start, I'm going to leave the words to Teresa. Teresa said is the city lead to Vault Frankfurt, which is going to give us a German perspective on this. Teresa, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Francesca. Hi, my name is Teresa Kraft from Frankfurt, and I'm going to try to summarize the current situation in Germany and also in Frankfurt due to the coronavirus crisis for you. In Germany, the restrictions are also increasing. Francesca already gave us the numbers, and most cases are in the state NRW, where the big carnival events and parties took place last month, and there are currently 9 deaths in Germany in total. The Bundeswehr will help in the fight against the pandemic. For example, all reservists are requested to report for medical service in Bundeswehr hospitals. And in view of the expected increase in demand, all German hospitals are requested to postpone plannable operations and interventions in order to create free capacity for basic care. To this end, hospitals should recruit additional personnel, and the government will try to compensate for the resulting economic consequences for the hospitals, for example, by offering bonuses per additionally created intensive care bed. And all people who have returned from Italy, Austria, and Switzerland are to stay at home for 14 days. From Monday onwards, schools and daycare centers will be closed throughout Germany. And also starting Monday, Germany's borders to France, Switzerland, and Austria will be closed. The rest will remain open, with only the border guards being reinforced. The government does not see the conditions needed for closing all borders. This would, the conditions would be a serious threat to public or internal security. In the case of cross-border journeys, the carriers are obliged to distribute information to prevent illness. The German rail operator Deutsche Bahn is restricting regional transport, but this is in response to the low number of passengers. It's not a preventive measure of the railway company to reduce the spread of the disease. Large events involving more than 1,000 people should only be allowed to take place in exceptional cases. For the most part, however, the individual states have already ordered stricter measures. For example, Berlin has banned all public and private events with 50 or more people and closed pubs, bars, and cinemas. Fitness studios and swimming pools are also closed. In Hesse, where Frankfurt is located, events with 100 or more participants are prohibited and museums are closed. However, many clubs and organizers already cancel events on their own initiative. Employers increasingly order their employees to work from home. In the speech of our Chancellor Angela Merkel regarding the coronavirus situation, it is now about showing solidarity. She has not decided or communicated any concrete measures. The idea of the German government is to delay infections and possibly achieve herd immunity. In order to prevent the virus from spreading, citizens must take responsibility and act themselves. The current government measures will not be enough. In answer to that, Volt Germany has cancelled its party conference this month, and our regular meetings will only be held digitally for the next time. We from Frankfurt take the situation very seriously and urge everybody to act responsibly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Honestly, I'm glad to hear that a lot of measures have been taken in Germany also. Just to mention, I received today an interesting proposal that I want to share with you. So our local chapter, Volt Pisa is a city here in Tuscany, has sent a proposal to their local government to have a free psychological service for citizens to confront this lockdown that we are experiencing. Because you mentioned, Teresa, a lot of interesting measures that have been taken, but we're actually not able to go out in the streets at the moment. So this also has, a kind of a psychological impact. Anyway, thank you again for this perspective. I see that Eugenio is still not able to connect with us, so we're gonna skip to Simona Bonafè, which I again thank for being here. You can, I'm sure, give us a very interesting perspective, being yourself a member of the European Parliament. there might be some issues with the line. Simona, are you able to unmute yourself? All right, perhaps. Oh, yeah.
You should hear me now.
Sorry. Yes, we do. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
No worries.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you to inviting me in this very interesting experience in these very difficult days. As you have just said, we are experiencing lockdown days, and it's a very critical situation in Italy, as Francesca has said before. I am a member of the European Parliament, and so you can understand I will give you the perspective of what we are doing in Europe in this very complicated phase. Because as a matter of fact, we have in front of us one of the most important crises of our time. We have been working in the last decades thinking that we should have protected ourselves from wars, that our emergencies in Europe were migration, economic growth, climate change. And in 2 weeks, we have completely changed our mind. And we now have to fight against a virus without a vaccine, with a fragile sanitary system all over the world, the civil world, not sufficient enough to contain all the person that will need care in this difficult situation. And apart from the sanitary emergency, we are facing a, let me say, parallel economic problem due to the block of almost all activities in most countries of Europe. Let me say that in a very first moment, I had the impression that even from my colleagues, the members of the European Parliament in Europe, the coronavirus was seen only as an Italian problem, while it was clear from the beginning that this was not only an Italian problem, that this was an European problem. In these days, we have seen that, on the contrary, the virus cannot be stopped on the border, and now every country has to face the aggression of the virus. And we could see what is happening in Germany from our I can't remember the name from well, in any case, we have just seen what is happening in Germany, but the situation is very difficult in every country in Europe. So if the question is how Europe should have responded to this epidemic, the answer is with an European response, that it will have not eliminated the epidemic, but it could have reduced the contagion. It is true that Europe has not competence in health policy, but according to the Treaty on the Functioning of Europe, the Commission at least should have coordinated the response of member states. At the very beginning, the Commission established a task force and put on the table some money, but not enough. But let's see what is doing the Commission, what is managing now, because now we have to talk on the measure that we need now, not the measure that should have been put in act in a few days ago. Coming to now, well, as deputies of the Democratic Party, we asked the Commission to face this extraordinary moment with extraordinary efforts, both on health and on economic side, as, let me say, the Italian government has done and is going to do even this evening with a new law, with new economic measures. We have launched, as I said, as members of the European Parliament, as democratic member of the Italian democratic members of the European Parliament, we have launched a document that you can find in a very detailed way on the website of my group, and of course on the website on my website as well. I summarize the most important proposals to tackle the crisis, the most important proposal to do now, because now we need to act in a very fast way. So first of all, we need a better coordination with member states to face the crisis in a united and effective way. Second, we need to put healthcare measures to eradicate the virus. As soon as we eradicate the virus, we limit the economic impact. On this point, we have asked the creation of a European purchasing center to procure and distribute the materials necessary for the prevention and the treatment of those that are affected by the virus. We have asked the creation of a European research consortium on the COVID vaccine, because we need a vaccine. We don't have a vaccine, but we need to invest in Europe to have a European vaccine that needs to us. And we have launched a very specific mission in the field of Horizon program, the old Horizon 2020, in order to invest more on prevention and treatment of the virus. This is in this moment and for the future. Coming to intervention in the economic and employment fields, it's not enough, let me say, to use all the flexibility in the Stability and Growth Pact. We need more money in every member state to spend on this, on the economic field. But let me say, we need more money also at European level. On this point, is good what the president of the Commission has said 2 days ago in Italian, by the way, and she said that she will invest 25 billion euros, but we need to involve in this battle also the EBC. And let me say, maybe it's time to revise the mission of MES, because we need a lot of liquidity, and we need liquidity for the real economy. There is another pillar that is very important, and is the social policies to support families. It's not new, but we are asking to have a European unemployment insurance scheme, for example. And last but not least, to protect internal markets, because a lot of medical devices in those days have been stopped at borders, and this is not good. And Italian goods have been stopped on borders, and this is unfair competition, and it's not solidarity between states, between member states, in a very difficult moment for everybody. Concluding, let me say that I think that the new phase is opening in Europe, for Europe, a phase in which we ask for extraordinary means to revise what in Europe hasn't functioned till now. I know that it's not good to say now, but I hope that this emergency has shown that we need to have more Europe, but a different Europe, a Europe more more solid, where there is more solidarity, and a Europe that can afford heavy emergency, because with this coronavirus, we have the impression that no emergency can be resolved in a national border. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very passionate, and frankly, I loved it. Thank you for giving us your perspective. I really like the topic of coordination and the topic of the state of the union, in a way, because we as a party, we also agree with the idea that we need more Europe, but perhaps a different one. I would like maybe later to spend 2 words on the connection between global warming and this epidemic, because I believe that there is actually a connection. Spillover always happen because we go ahead with the deforestation. But I don't want to steal time to the next guest we're having, so I'm going to ask Costanza to unmute herself. I had introduced her before, and I think she's a comparativist among a lot of other things. So she could give us an idea of what the situation between Germany and Italy are in comparison, but in general, she also has a European spirit, so perhaps that's the perspective she should talk us about. Costanza, please.
So good evening, and many thanks for the invitation. I think having this kind of debates, public debates, and keeping ourselves up to date and connected at this moment in time is very important. So thanks for organizing this and for being here, and also thanks to Simona, because it's important to have updates from our representatives in the European Parliament and having clear proposals. I share most of Simona's proposals, by the way. And as Europa, we have made some proposals ourselves, and we have also engaged into something we are doing daily. We are basically organizing every afternoon a debate that is streamed on social media on several different aspects of the emergency. So the economic aspects, the impact, for instance, on freelancers and entrepreneurs. We discussed about the prison emergency that was very scary in Italy some days ago, and we discussed about scientific communications online in the time of the coronavirus. I think these are all topics that are very important and should be addressed in all our discussion. But coming to your question, yes, it's true. I'm a comparativist, which means that I teach political science and I compare countries. And yes, I was looking at the Germans and what they were doing and what other countries in Europe have been doing. There have been many analyses, and obviously Italy has taken the lead in adopting some measures because it was struck before other countries. It seems now that the rest of Europe is aligning on the Italian approach. I think that even the Netherlands, that had been following Britain up until now, has decided, I think 1 hour ago, to close schools and close restaurants and bars and sport centers. Okay, we can discuss later about the UK exceptionality. I think they are taking a high risk. But coming back to Germany and Italy, first of all, from a European perspective, I'm very happy about what the Commission has been able to do today. It's true, the European response has been slow. Too many thought that it was an Italian problem before being a European problem. And also the statement made by the president of the Commission just a few days ago was addressing Italy, and I was very happy that it was addressing Italy. It was, by the way, something necessary at that moment in time, as it had been necessary afterwards to come back to what the president of the European Central Bank had been saying, that seemed to be addressed to Italy only, and it wasn't a good address when she said that the bank wasn't there to support the response to coronavirus, and especially to lower the spread in between the different long-term bonds rates in between different countries. So there has been a reaction on the side of the European Commission. I'm not a member of the European Parliament.
All right, I believe
so I'm less. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, no, because I think there was an issue with your your connection in the last 2 minutes. If you don't mind going back, just really 1 minute.
I'm sorry. So where did you lose me?
All right. So you were referring to the differential between the German and Italian bonds and the very unfortunate statement by Christine Lagarde, and that we lost you.
Yes. So we have had a mixed reply by Europe, so to say, but the European Commission and other supranational institutions such as the ECB. I tend to think that it's this political unpreparedness is characteristic not only of the European Union, and I think that now it has taken a better approach, but also of our respective countries. Just to compare Italy and Germany, we are experiencing, all of us, a big mess, a big confusion in between central government and local governments. And this is something that is common to Italy and to Germany as well. We have seen many landers doing different things, and I don't think the issue is sorted out yet, which is a little bit what happens in Europe. I mean, with many different countries taking different approaches. And the European Commission doesn't have the power to even give advice on this kind of measures, which depend on national sovereignty, like curtailing freedom of movement, for instance, for our own citizens. But there needs to be more coordination. Something that Simona hasn't mentioned, which I think is very, very important for public opinion and all of us, is understand whether we can have a common framework in order to count the people who are affected by the virus. This is, I mean, nobody understands why Italy seems to have such a high mortality rate in comparison to other countries. I think, most of us think, it depends on the way in which we count. And we have research agencies, we have universities, we have the European Center for Disease Control. This is something that must be sorted out as we speak, because otherwise we cannot understand how to counter the virus. We cannot convince people to close or not to close borders. This is going to be, I think, for me, is something that it's really scary. What are we going to do if Italy gets better and the other countries don't get better at the same time? Are we really arguing that we won't close our borders because we are pro-Europeans, or are we miscounting? What are we going to do? I think there needs to be a plan for this that comes from the EU institutions, because freedom of movement is our dearest acquis, in a sense, and we are struggling with it. We don't know what is going to happen. Let me say that I'm happy today because we blame the Commission and the European institutions for many things. It is right to blame them for some things, for instance, Lagarde's speech a couple of days ago, but it is not relevant to blame them when they don't have a competence to do something. Breton today exercised the internal market prerogatives of the Commission to unblock the delivery of some medical equipment. The Commission is good at doing this, stretching its competencies when it can, and implement the powers when it has it. And I hope it will be able to do it also during the next days. And another hope that I can state here is that more countries will follow the Italian approach, because simply as our borders are porous, and they have been so until recently, even in spite of the Germans' decision to close some borders today, if one country adopts a solution and the other countries adopt different solutions, and we are all on the same ground, it won't work. It probably won't work. So I hope that we have adopted the best solution here, and that some other countries will follow, and the Commission will support this effort. I think research funding is the most important thing to do. We ask the Commission for money. We know the EU budget is tiny. So we know that we can ask only some measures, I mean, in terms of spending, we need to have first coordination on numbers, second research efforts, third, obviously, all the flexibility we can have, fourth, an internal market power that is used in order to prevent some the closure of borders and egoistic measures in terms of medical equipment. That is very important. Last thing, people in Italy tend to look at Germany and at the stimulus package or the loan guarantees that have been adopted there in the amount of 550 billion as something incredible in comparison to what Italy has been doing. I just want to say, and I would like you to confirm, that it's different kind of measures. We adopted a package of 25 billion that go into spending, is public spending for health, research, and support to employment. And probably we're going to adopt another package of 18 billion later today. The German measures, insofar as I understand, are grants from the KfW on loans, but please also explain this to us, because the Italian media have been saying very, very different things. Let me conclude by saying that we have done one of our video conferences on the measures that need to be applied to freelancers and small entrepreneurs in Italy. Is the economic tissue of our country is done of this kind of individuals, and our economy depends a lot on that. I think we all need to focus on how we are going also to support this kind of workers over the next months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Costanza. That was very interesting. So I think we're all tackling the topic of coordination within the countries in order to face both the pandemic as it is right now. You had a question for German measures that have been taken, which I'm going to ask Teresa or whoever else is online who knows about this to reply. And also to face the economic crisis that has already started, but of course, who is going to be much worse in the next future. And connected to that, the topic of solidarity within countries, so coordination, but also solidarity, which lands, in my opinion, also on what the public opinion is about why we should be in the union in the first place. But speaking of people who usually know all the answers, our last speaker here is going to be Andi Shehu. He usually knows every answer. And he is a PhD researcher at the European University Institute and also in economic history, and also the president of Volt Italia. So I'm going to leave the word to you, Andi.
Thank you, although I'm not sure I know every answer, absolutely the opposite. Anyhow, thank you. I want also to thank both Simona and Costanza for being here, because this was really important, and both their perspectives were incredibly useful. And I want also to mention that right now there is close to 100 people following on Facebook, so we reached some people today, and we hope this was interesting for them as well. And some questions are coming in, so maybe later we'll have some time to answer those. As far as what my intervention, I want to talk about the economic impact of coronavirus and how we can try to deal with that, and what I think maybe will be an opportunity for Europe to revive itself and to make itself feel closer to the average citizen, because both Simona and Costanza touched upon this thing that we cannot not ask too much of the European institutions, and I do agree, but we can ask much more of the European states as far as cooperation goes, because it's clearly not enough. And then we can ask them to improve the work they are doing and to improve coordination and cooperation. And that's the final point I want to close with. So first, let me start with saying that this is this will be a huge economic shock. So the maximum expansion was reached last month, and now we are already in crisis situation. And this is different from the 2008 crisis, because this is both a supply shock and a demand shock. So on one hand, we have people across the world who are afraid to travel, obviously for obvious reasons, who are afraid to go shopping and who are afraid to do a lot of normal stuff. And this transforms into a demand shock, but it's a differentiated demand shock. So this makes it also different from 2008, because some sectors will actually see a boom, and I'm talking about, for instance, for medical sectors, and other sectors will go bust, will risk going bust. But it is also a supply shock, and this is the most problematic thing, because global supply chains have been disrupted. There was a moment from China when more than 90% of the shipping from China was cut off. And that, given that China is at the epicenter of global trade, that meant that every country was going to suffer soon problems. And I want to add on that for China, it was even easier in a sense than from Italy, because the province where Wuhan was centered was only 3% of China's territory. So by isolating that territory completely and cutting it off, China could still rely on the rest of the territory to produce everything it needed, while for Italy, the lockdown is in the whole of the country. And it seems, by what you have heard, what we have heard today, that this will be what will happen also in the other countries in Europe. So the supply shock will be even tougher in Europe than it was in China. And that will make for a very different economic impact. So how do you deal with this? Obviously, this is a very tough question, and we will need to experiment as societies with this, because we don't have a clear answer right now. But what we do know from our 2008 experience, that there will be need for obviously fiscal expansion, but this fiscal expansion cannot be led by countries alone. Otherwise, what will happen is that there will be spillover effects from one country to another, and the fiscal expansion will not be successful to help with economic growth. And this will also be needed. There will be need for the monetary policies to accompany the fiscal expansion. So we will need the European Central Bank and our central banks to intervene and to keep liquidity circulating in the whole economy, and particularly in those sectors where the crisis will hit hardest. In Italy, this will be, and also in Germany, I think, will be the small and medium enterprises, which will need particular care if they are to survive. So we have, in this moment, this double problem, and we don't have actually the instruments to intervene, because, as we said before, the budget of the European Union is very tiny. And I think Simona mentioned the mess which need to be revised. I totally agree, but I also think that maybe using the mess for this kind of measures might be the wrong way, and might not be the reason why the mess was thought. Its existence was decided in the beginning. So I do think that maybe we need another scheme. This has been talked a lot after the 2011 European crisis, and which is the insurance fund scheme, which is a scheme to help countries in cases of shocks of big, this big like this one. So what we'll need to do as a European Union, as European countries, is to pool our resources and then to coordinate the intervention in the sectors and in the parts of Europe that will need them the most. Now, I don't want to go too long on this, but what I want to add, the two other last things. The first thing is that most economicians I've read these last days insist on one thing before any other, that the most important interventions that we can make is actually interventions helping stop the spreading of the virus. So that is most important, the most important element. One, because it saves lives, but secondly, also for the economy, because we can do whatever we do with fiscal and monetary policies that will not help with people staying home because they are afraid, and that will not help with rightly afraid, and that will not help with supply chains going bust. So only by stopping the virus, then we can then later focus on the economic side. This was the first thing. And the second thing that I want to add is that it is, I think, normal that in cases like this, countries would try to think in a more nationalistic way, and to try to preserve, I don't know, medical supplies. It's not, you cannot blame some country or another because they are trying to prevent maybe the depletion of those medical supplies at home. What we need to do, though, is, this is why we need coordinated efforts from the European level, is to create a panel of experts which suggest to the countries how to act, where to direct resources, where we need the supplies in that moment, in that specific moment, and so on and so forth. And that what else we need is that this panel of experts is independent, kind of like a central bank, so that it can make suggestions to countries, but it responds politically to no country. It's just a panel of medical and economic experts who try to make better and better suggestions to improve the condition and the fighting against the virus. And this was my last point, and so thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. You tackled a lot of things. I really liked the point you made about the fact that in this moment, stopping the virus means both saving lives, of course, but also, even if it doesn't look like it, it also is going to help rebuild or save, I don't know which is most correct, the economy in the upcoming future. And you also mentioned the idea of having a panel of experts, which are not politicians, if I understand that correctly. I would argue that whatever intervention you make from an economic standpoint is going to be a political intervention, because it's going to be affected by the way people live and experience and perceive reality, which is, at least in my opinion, politics. So, but then if you want, we can discuss about that later. Meanwhile, I would like to say hello to our friends connected from all over Europe. I hear that there is Vault Netherlands connected, and also I believe somebody from Belgium. Hello, thank you for tuning in. Meanwhile, I encourage everybody to ask questions in our Facebook Live. Some questions have already arrived. So there is one for Simona. I'm going to read that. So the question would be, against such a crisis, which could be quite obviously foreseen, being started in Italy, German or any EU members, why do you think EU failed to plan, set up a common strategy to confront it? So Simona, if you want to reply to that.
Can you repeat, please, the last words, because the connection was not so good and I couldn't understand, please?
No problem. So why do you think the European Union failed to plan and set up a common strategy to confront this? I know it's a big question. It's the question, perhaps.
It's a very big question. I think it failed. I should say, because it's not a competence of Europe. but I know that this is just one part of the answer, because some things could have been done even if Europe hasn't, even if Europe hasn't the competence. I think, for example, the coordination should have been done in a better way from the beginning of this crisis. And I don't know why Europe didn't done that. But in any case, this is only one part of the question. The other part, in my opinion, is that we are not conscious, we are not aware of the fact that even this crisis should have needed an European response. As I said before, I had the impression, even between my colleagues, that's the problem, even between my colleagues, that this was only an Italian problem, and that only Italy should have faced this problem, while we have said from the beginning of this crisis in Italy that this was not only an Italian problem. But answer has arrived later now, and if Europe had coordinated more, probably the widespread of the contagion should have not so big as we have now at the moment. I don't know if I have answered, but this.
I agree with you. Yeah, that is actually, the big question, the reason, at least from my side, the reason why we're here. So I think you kind of replied to that, but the reply would be that, yeah, you as failed to coordinate. There are two other questions arriving. I'm gonna let the speakers decide to what reply in which order. So there's one question for everybody, which would be, so I'm going to read that. Each country is reacting to the coronavirus by adopting different strategy and timelines. Could we encourage the emergence of a European healthcare institution that coordinates and standardizes practices across the European countries? That would be the first question. I'm going to let you think, and I'm going to read the second question for the Italian speakers. I hear that also Val Denmark is connected. Hello, Val Denmark. So the question for the Italian speakers would be, is there anything you can share from Italy with an advance in severity of the crisis compared to other EU nations that would help the other nations which are behind in dealing with the crisis? What makes everyday life easier? Any learnings to give an edge to the other nations? I post this on our chat so everybody can read that, and whoever wants to reply, just unmute yourself and go ahead.
If you want, I can go ahead. Fine?
Please
all right.
do so, please.
In terms of sharing the Italian experience, we worry a lot about the economy, and we are right in doing so. We need to think about the measures that we will need to take once this period comes to an end. I think that many leaders have been worrying about the reaction of the population, the panic, and this has been also a reason why the adoption of specific solutions has been delayed. I think that our example in Italy, if it can be of help to anyone else, is that at some point the population understands and reacts. It has taken a couple of decrees maybe, but they were adopted over 3 days. So it hasn't taken so much in a sense. And now we see a lot of discipline, I think, if we can call this discipline, because it's self-prevention in a sense, and also a lot of solidarity in between the different people, and enthusiasm for the response of the health service. It has taken a while, but I think, my recommendation is not to be afraid to implement these difficult measures and be afraid about the reaction of the population, because everyone is seriously concerned. And so as we have been taking the limitations seriously, so could do other populations. So we need to be bold, I think, in taking these decisions, and at the same time, of course, thinking hard at the economic solutions that will need to be implemented. And Andi was obviously pointing at some important measures we need to think about. In terms of coordination of health institutions, crises are always moments when the EU, the states, manage to understand that it's better to give up some of their competence in order to have more new coordination. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
All right. It's been the case for terrorism, where we managed to adopt new framework decisions and directives on terrorism, and to have an EU counter-terrorism coordinator and some criminal measures at the European level that we didn't have before, and a coordination in between the different prosecutors and so on. It has been the case for many other for some other cases, and I think there are some basic EU institutions like the ECDC, the European Centers for Disease Control, and other agencies that can be empowered. So we don't need to create anything new. We just need to make the agencies work, and we need to have more trust in some of the institutions that we have already. I really hope, I seriously hope that out of this crisis, if anything good can come, apart from Trump's non-re-election, it could be to have some more preparedness by understanding that we cannot stay alone. And I say again, the instruments are there. Even if the treaty doesn't, even if the competences in the treaty haven't been exercised in order to fully exercise the potential we have for coordination, the prevention and the, healthcare is a complementary competence for EU institutions. So it can be exercised from a European level already as we stand right now. We just need to do so because once we have understood that we can do so, and it's important to do so from a supranational level.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Of course. Yeah, go ahead.
If I may say in 2 words, I will be very brief, because it's very important to understand what other member states can share of the Italian experience. And I should say that they have to lock down as soon as possible. Because, for example, I do not understand, maybe there is someone from France, I couldn't understand the response of Macron to say we lock down, but we celebrate the elections as well. I know that the lockdown is not easy to afford in a democratic state. I want to be clear. It's the lockdown. It engages the liberties, the way in which we live. As Andi said, it's very different to lock down in a democratic country or to lock down in China, for example, because as we know, China is not a democratic country. And that's why I think that even if it's difficult, they need to understand that it's the only way in which we can contain the contagion of the coronavirus. Just this.
Thank you very much. I really agree with you that it's very difficult at the very beginning to understand why you should limit your freedom. We're really not, and I'm glad for that. We really don't understand what that means. So at the very beginning, it's very hard. There should be somebody from France connected. So if anybody wants to intervene, just send us a message on Facebook. My good friend Pietro is helping me to deal with the questions. The other question,
I wanted to give also a small answer on is there anything we can share from Italy? So 2 things. The first goes in the same line that the previous two answers were, in saying absolutely don't underestimate the importance, and don't underestimate it because there are, for instance, at the moment, apparently less deaths related to coronavirus in other countries, because as Costanza said, this can be a problem of how we are measuring. It's also another kind of problem in the sense that given that the coronavirus started later, the time lag for people to actually start and die makes the calculations very wrong in the first period. So that can lead to completely misleading conclusions about what's the actual impact of the virus, and so to completely misleading conclusions about what we need to do against it. We had the same experience here in Italy, where in the first phases we underestimated it, and we saw the same experience done in other countries when they initially began to underestimate it, as others have said. But I want also to add that you don't need to learn only from Italy, because actually some countries, and I want to point out that those countries are Taiwan and Hong Kong and South Korea, had even better applications, instruments for fighting the coronavirus as Italy. They used some apps which maybe, there is a discussion about this, which is unresolved at the moment, maybe can impinge on our privacy, but at the same time, these apps allowed for people to know what, if you are, let's say, if you are a person who has the coronavirus, then every person you met can be directly called by the hospital to be tested. And so in this way, you have a map of all the people who have the contagion, and you can just ask those specific people to stay in lockdown, and then economic life and the other rest of our life can go on. So Italy is a good example compared to other countries in Europe, but I would say not the best example in the world. And you can see this very clearly on the spread of the contagion in different countries. And you can see that in Italy, you have a spread of contagion which is roughly 1/3 increase every day, while in the other countries, it can go down to 1/10 or less, which means they are slowing it down with much better results. As far as if lockdown gets enacted, it will not be in a democratic country a complete lockdown, so there will be several liberties, for instance, for your dog, or to go have a walk. You just need to keep some social distancing, and what will make everyday life easier is what we are doing right now. So thankfully we have ways to connect, to talk, to discuss, and this is, I would say, the best that we can do of this moment. And this is also, as we are being saying, a moment where we can start thinking ahead and start devising real instruments to deal with these kinds of crises in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I have been speaking a lot to my colleagues involved during the last days, and I completely agree with you that this is a moment that, even though it's very difficult, it's really an opportunity for us, for the whole system, to be rethought and to understand what is the future that we really envision and we want. This is why actually we decided to do this meeting in the first place. And I really hope this is just the first, and that we can continue this discussion in perhaps also confronting ourselves on what measures are going to be taken in the next weeks, and what is working and what is not working. Andi, you mentioned a different style of containing the epidemic in the southeast of Asia, which perhaps can be interesting to be analyzed. I don't I'm not sure there is any other question. Oh no, yeah, there is. So I'm gonna read this. It's directed to everybody. Whoever wants to reply, just unmute yourself as usual. We're running a little bit late, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to continue this very interesting discussion. So yeah, the question would be, how do you think the European Union will react to the external interferences that great powers like China and the US are trying to use in this moment of crisis? I'm referring to the experts and medical aid sent by PRC and to the recent tweet of Trump displaying Frecce Tricolore planes to show support from US to Italy. Anybody who wants to reply, just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Simona, do you want to go ahead? Otherwise, I can always comment on Trump and China.
Oh, you can go, Costanza. You can go.
All right. Well, let me just say one thing about Andy's intervention that was looking at South Korea and at the model of remote control of people. It scares me. I have to tell you, it scares me. I think there might be options in order to do that. I mean, to check where we are and what our state of health is, that doesn't completely infringe our privacy and our possibility to remain, not totally controlled by the states. But I don't know exactly how it can be done technically, and I don't know. For the time being, I prefer staying home than having people knowing where I am all the time through those kind of measures. But this is just my individual reaction. Concerning China, I mean, it's unfortunate to see how in Italy, for instance, there is still a room to do political propaganda, even at these points in times. I think I've seen our Minister for Foreign Affairs really getting excited at getting this kind of help from China, and China also moving into this direction. I'm always very wary of this kind of actions and the kind of reception that only one part of the Italian politicians had when the medical experts, the doctors, and the medical supplies came from China. I don't think it's something completely out of solidarity. China's been trying for a long time to establish a special partnership with Italy. You will remember the issue of the ports some months back. So I think that politically speaking, we need to be very much aware of the fact that on the one hand, there is solidarity. On the other hand, there is always economic opportunities to be created out of this kind of efforts. And I am really skeptical about the fact that we are now praising China and blaming the European Union because of this single episode. That's my reaction as a supporter of the EU, let's say, and a person that is always wary of non-democratic regime. And as of Trump, I think it's today's action, and the amount of times he changed his mind over the past 7 days. I mean, it doesn't need comments, I think.
Thank you, Costanza. I think we heard you loud and clear about Trump. Andy, I don't know if you want to, I see you're unmuting. Do you want to reply to Costanza?
Yes, but I don't know if Simona wants to go ahead before.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, before everybody continues, like I'm letting everything go, even though we're running late. Of course, if somebody wants to stop this, we were supposed to finish at 8. I see you're all still online, but feel free to tell us if you need to leave. I'll leave the word to you. Sorry.
Thank you. So just two small things. I wanted to first answer Costanza's point about privacy issues. I fully agree with you that there are privacy issues, but as experts in this field have explained, there are really secure ways to ensure privacy, in the sense that to ensure that your data are anonymized completely, and only the hospitals and the people who need those data can access them only for health reasons, without not even knowing personal relations and why they have been pinpointed by the program as people who need to be subjected to the test. So this is absolutely sure that we can do this. So that I think should allay our fears that this is something that is going to give more control to the state. It's just a way to ensure healthy, otherwise in an otherwise complicated situation, and it's comparable to what we do on other fields already. For instance, as you mentioned beforehand, terrorism. So it's not very, very different. But I agree that it shouldn't be a way to open up private lives to third actors. That being said, I just want to add that on the other side, I also agree with Costanza's problem with now claiming that China is doing great things. China is an undemocratic system and has tried to solve this problem in a very harsh way, put people in hospitals contrary to their wills with violence, and I don't think that just because they are giving some medical supplies, we should, I don't know, change our minds as far as about what the situation in China is and what the situation of Chinese people is right of this in this moment. And about Trump, this I think it's a crucial point that we underestimate, I'm afraid. While Trump has changed his mind a lot of times, and this makes for a very unreliable partner, I do think that that is a problem. Why? Because maybe I'm focusing again too much on the economic side, but I want to highlight that when the last crisis came in 2008, it was because of the Federal Reserve intervention that the European banks survived, and that was done because we had an agreement at the G20 that the countries would do their utmost to support each other. While this time, the US, for instance, the Federal Reserve acted some days ago completely unilaterally without consulting anyone. And that is a sign of the times and a sign that we have an unreliable partner on the other side of the Atlantic. And so when economic crisis will hit, we need to know already that we need to think that we will have to help ourselves. So that's another reason why setting up European institutions to deal with the problem is urgent. This, although doesn't translate into us going into isolation as the US has done, actually the opposite. This is the starting point for Europe to try and to be the center of stability and to be the center of that the US was in 2008, in a sense. So it's a chance for us to demonstrate that we can help solve the problems in other places as well. And I think this is my last point.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think what you just tackled, so the role of the USA in the last crisis and in this one should deserve a complete, like, its whole session, because it's really, I believe, one of the most important points we're facing now, and the role of and how the role of EU could change in this crisis. There are a lot of questions really upcoming. I'm gonna read one more, and then you tell me if you want to keep going or not. If we're not going to be able to reply to every question, we can of course do do another session. I think somebody has unmuted. Simona, perhaps you want to say something before I ask the question?
No, sorry. I was just, I wanted to add something to the previous question, but it's not important. If you want, you can go ahead, and I can say something later.
All right.
In the next few minutes, because then I have to leave as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but it is very good. We're connected with really a lot of people at the moment who are still following us.
Maybe, as you said before, we can make another meeting in which to
absolutely
go ahead in this good reflection.
Absolutely. I'm anyway gonna be writing down all the questions we receive, and we're gonna give a reply on our Facebook page, Volt Firenze, and we're gonna tag everybody who was here if they want to add something. So the last question I would ask is from our good friend Gabriele Bianchi from Toscana nel Cuore. They're going to run with us at the regional elections this spring, if there are going to be regional elections. So the question was, the European Central Bank could better use the money it makes available if the COVID-19 problem had a unique direction. In your opinion, what are the greatest obstacles to this? I don't know who wants to reply to this. Teresa, if you've been, you haven't spoken in a while, so if you want to jump in, just feel free to do so. If not, whoever else wants to reply, you're very welcome to do so.
So I can say something. First of all, I hope that the elections in Tuscany, there will be maybe once. We do not know when, but I hope that there will be. I answered to the question of Gabriele, but let me say at this point that 2 words on the previous question, because I think, I think that we are in a moment in which we need the aid, the help of everybody. That's why for me it's important that from China could came some medical supplies, some medical aids, because as you know, in Italy, for example, we do not have, I don't know the name in English, but we do not have the medical device that you put on your face in order not to not to be, in order to be more safe. That's why it's important, the aid, the help that other states can do to Italy and to Europe. The problem is if great powers try to introduce themselves in order to destroy the project of European Union. And this is not a new point. I mean, in the other years, we have seen that great powers have tried to destroy our project. That's why we need to create, we need this, we need to find the opportunity with this crisis in order to have another Europe, to have a different Europe, a Europe more related to the citizens' needs and not to the financial needs. And I want to respond to answer also to the question of Gabriele. As I said before, I think that EBC needs to have another approach. It's not fair that Christine Lagarde say it's not my problem if the spread is growing. She has done the idea that she doesn't believe in the let me say in another approach, that she was managing herself like a bureaucrat, not like someone that could help to have another project of Europe. So that's why I think that also EBC needs to be more let me say more needs to take into consideration more the citizen needs, the real economic needs, and not only the financial needs in Europe. So everything that can go in this direction could be good.
All right. very interesting. I also agree with you that it's about how you interpret your role and not about what's your mandate necessarily. I don't know if anybody else wants to reply to this before I wrap up and leave the audience. We're running 20 minutes late, but it has been a very, very interesting meeting.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Costanza.
No, just to launch a bomb before we close the conversation. On the ECB, the European Central Bank, and what has been done so far. So in spite of what Lagarde said, they adopted some limited quantitative easing, no, and they adopted some measures to face the crisis. But I mean, to some extent, my hope is that maybe this will be the time when we are all facing a big crisis together, because we will. I mean, I don't hope that we will. We are definitely going to face all a big crisis. And I wonder whether it will be the time when we pass from quantitative easing to common European bonds. And from there, we develop a truly European budget and we make step forward into our integration process. This is something I ask myself, and I hope somebody is studying this option and will be pursuing this option.
I just want to add that I fully agree with that. I think that's the best route away, and that's why I was talking about also of a common insurance fund. That would be the two things that we need.
All right, thank you very much. So we really tackled a lot of topics, starting with the coordination between the European Union member states, going to the influence of other big actors in the international politics, measures that have been taken in Italy, in Germany, and in general around the world, and the importance of how this is perceived from the general public. But really, we spoke a lot of things, and there are questions that keep coming, but we're not going to be able to reply to everything tonight. So what we're going to do is really to collect everything, redirect the questions to the speakers we had tonight, and try to give you who stayed with us this hour and a half already an answer. Unfortunately, Teresa had to leave and she wasn't able to say goodbye. From my side, I want to thank the speakers. You were amazing. Costanza Hermanin again, Simona Bonafè, Teresa Kraft, and Andi Shehu, of course. We're going to say hello to Eugenio Gianni, who unfortunately wasn't able to connect in the end. My special thanks to the Vault team who helped me organize this: Giovanni Cannizzo, Pietro Massai, Teresa Kraft, Johannes Heuschild or something, I'm sorry, my German is terrible, Giorgio Tosco, and of course Elisa Meloni. I'm gonna wish you a very good night. I take a lot of notes, and hopefully see you in the next meeting where we can choose another of the hundreds of topics that really we tackled today to deep dive in. Thank you again, everybody, for participating, and have a great night.
Thanks, everybody. It's been a great moment. The Facebook Live is down right now.
Okay, great.